Hello everyone, and welcome to Mountain Lake Journal. I'm Paul Larson. The Adirondack village of Saranac Lake, New York is captivating readers of a historical fiction novel by one of Canada's foremost authors, Giles Blunt. The book bears the intriguing title of Bad Juliet. It's the story of a man who takes a job as a tutor to the patients at the Trudeau Sanitarium. There he meets a young woman with a haunting past. Besides novels, Mr. Blunt also writes for television, including episodes of Law and Order, and the Cardinal TV series is adapted from his novels. They're available on streaming. He's come from his home in Toronto to join us in our studio today, and we're honored to have him. Welcome, Giles.
Thanks for having me.
So your 11th novel is called Bad Juliet, yes. This intriguing title. What is the premise of the book?
It's a story about a young poet, professor, novelist who loses his job at the university and has to take a job at the tuberculosis sanatorium in Saranac Lake. And there he falls in love with a woman who survived the Lusitania sinking a year previously, in which she lost her husband. He falls in love with her, but she, of course, is in love with someone else.
Intriguing. You've set your story in the Adirondacks at the Trudeau Sanitarium. Do you have any personal history with this area?
We love it. Basically, my wife and I try to come here every summer to the Adirondacks. We go to Blue Mountain Lake, which is about 30 miles south of Saranac Lake, and the first time we went, I came across a book that talked about the tuberculosis sanatorium in Saranac Lake, and I thought we should visit there. And ever since then, I've been crazy about the place, and I knew right away I'd set a novel there because of all the interesting history and the characters, the different types of people that were there 100 years ago. It's an amazing story.
Well, in the early 1900s, the sanatorium was a place where people would go for treatment of tuberculosis. What else about it makes it an effective setting for a story?
What intrigued me about it was, one, it was world famous. It drew people from all around the world and people from all different walks of life. The sanatorium was meant for people who couldn't afford treatment elsewhere, so you got lower income people. But at the same time, Saranac Lake and the Adirondacks in general attracted wealthy people. They had the great camps, and as a result of that, they had lots of other things, luxury things and so on, and high-class entertainment. At Saranac Lake had two Broadway-style theaters, and because they also entertainers got sick like other people, and there was a special sanitarium for them. It was full of entertainers, and I thought that's an interesting combination of people, you know. So that was another reason for it.
Now, as an author, what was important for you to convey about Saranac Lake as you wrote about it?
You know, what you want in a novel is a kind of crucible which forces people to reveal their characters through different situations. And you have, at a sanitarium, you have the young people, because tuberculosis tended to strike people between the ages of 16 and 34. They're away from home. There was stigma attached to the disease because it was contagious, and therefore it had a huge emotional impact. People often ended up getting divorced as soon as they got diagnosed, you know, or they fell in love with their doctor or nurse or fellow patients. So there was heartbreak all around the place. And one thing that kind of really intrigued me too was, given all that kind of scariness, everybody is totally cheerful. And I realized that was the de rigueur, that they insisted that people not talk about their illness at dinner time, and that being in a good mood was a very important part of their development. So I kind of wanted to touch on that too, because there's a character who insists everybody be happy, when of course they have many reasons not to be.
That is all fascinating, especially with the people falling in love with their doctors and nurses. How did you do the research for this book?
One of the great things about Saranac Lake is their historical society. They do great work. They have a really great museum in the lab there, and they've just opened a second part of the same museum, I guess, which is in the house where Dr. Livingston, the founder, lived and worked. And in addition, the library, the Saranac Lake Free Public Library, as they call it, has a research room. And the woman there, Michelle, found all sorts of stuff for me that I would have never found on my own, diaries and letters and things like that. It was a fabulous resource.
So you were actually in Saranac Lake?
Oh yeah. I went back many times. Stayed in one of the, well, actually what was called the reception hospital, where people went to be assessed to know which kind of facility they should be in. Were they in such dire straits that they had to be in bedridden, or were they what they called suitable for an up cottage, which meant you were up and around and allowed to go out for walks and so on. That was the reception hospital, but it was also the place where people went to their infirmary when the disease was running its full course and they were dying. They went there, and I stayed there overnight, which was odd because it was reputed to have a ghost. It was a very strange place to stay, I must say. It's like a town in 4 dimensions for me. I walk there and I see the history and feel all the people that used to live there.
And along the lines of history, you also wrote about the Lusitania disaster in the novel, as you'd said. What was this disaster?
The United States wasn't at war yet. The First World War was going on. The book set in 1916, essentially. The war started in 1914. The U.S. wasn't in it yet. And Great Britain was commandeering all sorts of their shipping for military purposes, and the Germans put out a notice saying, right under the Cunard ads, saying, if you travel in English waters, you're liable to be sunk because you were at war. Big reminder. But people still had to go there, and a lot of the passengers were Canadian because Canada was at war, and they took the British ships to England. And the woman at the center of the story was in the real story. There was a woman who was Canadian, and she survived, but her husband died on that. He was going to England to take up a commission as an officer in the British Army.
Did you base your character on a real person?
Very loosely, just the fact that she was on the Lusitania and survived and her husband died. Other than that, don't know very much about her, except that after the Lusitania was sunk by a German submarine, she came down with tuberculosis and came to Saranac Lake to cure, and that's all we know. She died a few years later, but it's not based on her to that degree. It's just what captured my imagination was you survive this incredible tragedy only to have your own personal tragedy right away. You've got this, you've lost your husband, and you've got a deadly disease, you know.
What else appeals to you about the period around 1915, 1916?
It was a very progressive age, and Saranac Lake, once the sanitarium was founded, it became so renowned that they had to turn away thousands of patients that they couldn't take. And the amazing thing about Saranac Lake was that the locals just said, well, we can help. And they changed the structure of their houses in order to take in patients. And there was nothing amateur about it. It was overseen by 3 different health agencies, and they widened their doors and put on these porches that you still see today. There's still 100 houses or so that have the cure porches put on them, which were glassed in with windows that you could angle so that you would get fresh air and sunshine. And you have to underline this, no matter what the weather. And as you know, in this area, the weather can be extreme. And they sat out there in all weathers, 30 below, wrapped up in their chairs. But what struck me about the character of the place was just this volunteerism, this can-doism. To me, it's the United States at its best. You had private philanthropy, state philanthropy, volunteerism, charities, the medical people, all working together to defeat this disease. And they started, the Easter Seal campaign, things like that. They developed highly detailed ways to educate and entertain their patients, who were sometimes there for years, bedridden for 10, 15 years, some of them. And I just thought that's just such a fascinating enterprise. And of course, couldn't miss that it was, you could compare it to what happened with COVID. I was already working on it when COVID struck, but it was certainly fascinating to see the similarities and differences in the responses.
And you came up with this wonderful title, Bad Juliet. What does that mean?
As you can gather from the outlines of the story, the woman's name is actually Sarah, but she's kind of a tragic figure. But she grew up in a household where her father was a photographer of the kind that created their own scenarios. Like he would take a scene from a Shakespeare play and dress people up in it. And he often used his daughter, Sarah, in those things. And he tried to get her to be Juliet, the scene of Juliet killing herself. And she said, I would make a terrible Juliet. And she refers to it later, too. And a couple of people are talking about, what does Romeo and Juliet mean? Does it mean great passion is a disaster, or does it mean you should always follow your true love even unto death? And she said, those plays I would make a bad Juliet. But of course she's kind of tragic.
Weaving through your story is the theme of deception. What draws you to that theme?
There's several themes in the book, and that was one that I actually thought about before I started the book. There is a playwright in the among the characters who's a dashing, confident fellow, but we come to learn he may not be all he seems to be. And Paul, the lead character, people constantly call him professor, even though he never was a professor. He was a teacher at a university briefly, but he was not a full professor. So there's people being mistaken for things they aren't.
So this is a story where the readers are learning about different characters' identities as they read the story. When you started writing the story, did you know where it was going?
Only in summary. I knew that there would be a love story, but I didn't know very much about it when I started, to be honest. I had to rewrite the opening many times. I couldn't even decide what my lead character's profession was going to be. I didn't know if he was... I knew I didn't want to write about a doctor. I didn't want the lead character to be a doctor or the patient. I wanted it to be a guy who's more of an observer. But I didn't know in much detail at all. No, I was kind of working in the dark for a long time.
So you've written this departure from your other novels. It has twists and turns, but your Cardinal series became a television series. Yeah. Do you think that Bad Juliet might be adapted someday? I
would love it if it were. I mean, it would be my favorite kind of miniseries, a historical thing not too far back in the past. Sexual romantic politics haven't changed all that much from that time, and the Juliet character, Sarah, is in various types of predicaments and has various relationships with men that highlight things that are very relevant today. There are aspects of Believe the Women, for example, that come up in the book. I can't go into detail about it, but I think women really respond strongly to this book. I think they really like Sarah for that reason.
Well, Giles Blunt, thank you so much for enticing us with this haunting world that's somewhat familiar to us in the North Country.
Yeah, it should be. Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
You're invited to discover the secrets and suspense of Bad Juliet. It's available online and at bookstores in the United States and Canada. And for more information about the author's novels and poetry, head to gilesblunt.com.